as being more than just ideology, but simply an economic factor that drives them to do it.
What the role of politicians in the situation that's right now here in Ukraine, the war? I mean, and can these politicians improve the situation? Those one who did it.
Can politicians improve? Well, you know, the fact is that, yeah, I mean, inflation can be dealt with, but typically it's an unpleasant process. The fact is that inflation usually, I mean, in real terms, people feel it. They feel inflation. It's something that, out of all the things that can be bad happening in your country, one of the things that polling would indicate people worry about the most, de facto, is inflation. As you see your salary disappearing, you see that your buying power changes, and it's worrisome for a country that has high inflation. Unfortunately, the United States is dealing with high inflation. Europe is dealing with high inflation. And so what we look at, and I think what we're going to see soon, is that there's probably going to be a lot of votes in elections to vote for more candidates and more leaders that are opposed to the governments who introduced the inflation, let's say, through their economic policies by printing too much money. But besides this, I think that we will see a rise, most likely, of populist right-wing parties, because they typically are the ones historically that gain the most from inflation. Now, left-wing parties could too, but it's usually the populistic ones on the right that I think that are probably going to win this time around.
Except for sanctions, there's the question of giving the weapons to Ukraine, and this is the one of the arguments between the parties that are before election that have different views. Yes. So talking about security and about giving the weapon to Ukraine, this question is interesting not only for the United States, but this question is interested for some Western European countries to give or not to give Ukraine weapons. What is the international system of security should or will look like after the end of the war?
I mean, I think the reality is that, you know, Ukraine is in a situation right now where it's still going to be the recipient of a lot of positive support from the West, from the United States, as well as from Europe. Yeah, I agree with you totally that there's some countries in the West, namely Europe, specifically I mean Europe, who have been sort of less than impressive in how they've wished to help Ukraine. They've delayed huge amounts of time, and that is unfortunate because the fact is it's costing lives. And they very incorrectly state that somehow that's going to help end the war sooner, which is absurd, or somehow that's going to, you know, it'd be a provocation, or worse in the war, to send weapons. It's absurd. The fact is this, is that the sooner that Ukraine wins, the sooner that Ukraine is able to force the Russians out, the sooner the war ends. So if you want peace in Europe, the best thing you could actually do is get more weapons to Ukraine faster. Because the faster that we get the Russians out of here, the faster this will all be done.
One more danger that politicians and experts say can come from China. If it's not from Russian side, but from China, because they can worsen the situation entering Taiwan. How do you see China is ready to risk everything?
So that's a good question. I mean, when we look at the fact that Xi was reelected now the third time, or I can't say elected, but for the third term, he's going to be he's going to be there for now again. And what's that show? I think that he really is tightening his autocratic rule of the country. And why I find that to be concerning is that I think he is on the road to becoming much more dangerous than he's historically been. And I think that that will eventually spill over on Taiwan, unfortunately. When that will happen, you know, I don't know. But I will say that there are the signs that he would do something like that. Not today, not tomorrow, but sometime in the near future, yes, quite possibly so. And I think it would be incredibly unwise of China if they do go that route, because they've seen the economic sanctions that Russia's suffering and everything else. But, you know, I guess if we were to play the devil's advocate, the other side of this would be, no, he's probably not going to do it. And the reason is he sees the economic sanctions. China has not violated the U.S.'s sanctions against Russia. And the reason is simple, is that they realize it's not something they want to get involved in. And I think that he would, if he's not going to even support Russia now, then I doubt that Xi or the Chinese would want to, just a few months from now, start a problem with Taiwan and be in the same boat as Russia.
We talked almost about every participant in all these global processes that can affect the situation in Ukraine. So let's get back to Russian Federation, almost the end of our conversation. What should happen to Russia for the war to end, and who can influence it? And more of this. Endlessly, you cannot give the weapons and put sanctions, weapons and sanctions. It cannot be for years.
No, it can't be forever. But at the same time, I think that it can go for long enough to end this war. The fact is that Russia is a country that is in decline. We've seen that jets have crashed recently. More airplanes are crashing. We don't know the reason yet, but I assume that the lack of maintenance is a significant factor. And as Russia continues on this road, every day is going to get harder. Every day there's less car parts. Every day there's less airplane parts. Every day there's less microchips. Every day there's less computers. And so as long as Russia wants to continue playing down this route, we can go for a few years like this. But Russia itself, I don't think economically can. I do think that Putin might be doing something that will, in the end, lead to his own downfall.
They lose the computers, they lose microchips, but they somehow get Iranian drones or...
And they get so they lose computers, they lose all technology, but they get Iranian drones, which total value of street manufacturing is around $3,000 or less, but they're being sold them for about $100,000 each by the Iranians. So yes, that is what they have as far as technology goes.
Mm-hmm. About strong Ukraine, let's look a little bit in the future. Is the world really ready to spend all this money, to give everything of their abilities to make the new strong Ukraine on the geopolitical map? And what place this Ukraine they are ready to accept? On what place, let's say?
No, I think that the fall of Moscow, which is...
It's a competition between the countries, but let's be honest.
So you don't receive anything, you have to take it. So what I think is going to happen, though, is that Russia is in decline, in significant decline, and I don't know how it's going to get out of that. But let's imagine while it's in decline, I think this does open up a lot of opportunities for Ukraine. Once again, across the former Soviet states, all the parts that Russia used to be a major player, Central Asia is an example thereof, I think there's a real chance. I think that a lot of dictatorships in Central Asia, for instance, once Putin falls, they will fall as well because they're tied to his regime. And I think in the case of Belarus, once Putin falls, I think everybody thinks that Lukashenko will also fall. And I think this will allow Ukraine, which is by population the largest of all the countries I just mentioned, it has the real potential to become a powerhouse economically, especially as it moves closer to the European Union. And that will allow Ukraine to project into areas where it hasn't historically, not just north to Belarus, not just east to Russia, but even further east to the Central Asian republics.
And last question is just going back to the very beginning of our conversation about blindness of some politics that could stop some process. Everything could be avoided. So how you see, everything can still be avoided now? And if not, what will be the next shock of the post-truth era?
I think that the fact is that we've learned an important lesson in the course of Russia. Unfortunately, it came a little too late, is that a lot of people have said that Putin is dangerous and he was going to take this direction. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the West didn't want to believe that. They wanted to believe that, he would stop at this point. He would stop after Georgia. He would stop after he took Crimea, stop after Donbass. And obviously that was not the plan. I mean, Putin very clearly has plans to keep expanding Russia. And so I think it's important now that there is this understanding of that fact with most of the countries, not all. And with those countries that do understand it, though, I think there's firm resolve that this time that they cannot repeat history. This time we have to actually stop Putin.
We still have a lot of work to do.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for our conversation. So I will remind our audience that we talked to Jeyson J. Smart, the political advisor, and hopefully we'll meet soon and talk about more useful decisions of politicians globally.
Sounds good.
Thank you.